Beavers were not always missing from Britain. For thousands of years, they were a natural part of rivers and wetlands across England, Scotland, and Wales. But by the early 1500s, that changed. People hunted them for their soft, waterproof fur. Their meat was highly valued, even served during religious fasts because some considered beaver tail to be fish. And then there was castoreum, a secretion used in perfumes and medicine. By the time Shakespeare was writing plays, there were no beavers left in Britain. The last ones were likely killed by the 16th century. And with them gone, something else happened, something less obvious. Wetlands dried up, fish populations changed. Entire ecosystems shifted without their main engineers. Their absence created problems that most people didn't recognize at the time. For most people, it stayed that way for centuries, until recently, because now, after 400 years, Britain is trying something it has not done in modern history, bringing back a lost species, and not just any species, but one that reshapes its environment in ways most animals never do. Beavers are not just passive animals living quietly by the water. They build dams, they create ponds, they slow rivers down and flood flat areas, forming wetlands. These wetlands act like giant natural sponges, absorbing rainwater, filtering pollution, storing carbon, and supporting hundreds of species. Without beavers, Britain lost a huge amount of wetland habitat. Many species that depended on these wetlands, from amphibians to birds to fish, declined or disappeared as well. For centuries, people simply adapted to a world without them. Farmers drained wetlands to create more fields. Rivers were straightened to control floods. But all of this came at a cost: increased flooding, poorer water quality, and vanishing biodiversity. And that leads to today. In the last few decades, researchers, conservationists, and some government officials started asking, what if the solution isn't more concrete walls and flood barriers? What if we brought back the species that manage these rivers naturally for thousands of years? That's how the movement to reintroduce beavers in the UK began. But bringing back a species after 400 years is not simple. It requires careful studies, legal debates, and a lot of public discussion. So who pushed for it, and where did it all start? That brings us to the first modern experiments. The first serious attempt to bring beavers back to the UK didn't happen overnight. It took years of planning, permits, and careful negotiations. The breakthrough came in 2009. In Knapdale Forest on Scotland's west coast, conservation groups received permission for a tightly controlled trial. This would be the first licensed release of beavers into the wild in Britain in over 4 centuries. 3 beaver families, imported from Norway, but were released into a handful of freshwater lochs. Scientists closely monitored everything: how they built dams, how other species responded, how much land was flooded, and whether conflicts would arise. At the same time, another story was quietly unfolding in England. On the River Otter in Devon, a small population of beavers somehow appeared in the wild. Some reports suggest they were released illegally. Others say they may have escaped from captivity. Either way, by 2013, these beavers were building dams, felling trees, and starting families without any formal approval. When local authorities discovered them, there was debate over what to do. Some pushed to remove them, others argued to let them stay and study them. The public response surprised many officials. Polls showed that most local residents actually supported the beavers. They liked the idea of having these animals back in British rivers. Conservation charities joined the debate, arguing that as long as the beavers posed no serious threat, they should be allowed to remain. But not everyone was on board. Some farmers worried about flooded fields and damaged trees. Landowners raised concerns about water levels and property rights. Environmental benefits sounded good, but would they outweigh the potential costs? These debates continued for years as researchers studied both the Knapdale and river otter populations. Meanwhile, beavers quietly went on doing what they've always done: building dams, creating ponds, and reshaping the land around them. What scientists found over the next few years was far more dramatic than anyone predicted. As the years went by, the research teams kept collecting data, and what they saw surprised even some of the strongest supporters. The beavers were not just surviving, they were reshaping the landscape in ways that hadn't been seen in Britain for hundreds of years. Beaver dams slowed down fast-moving streams. Water pooled behind them, creating ponds, wetlands, and small marshes. What used to be narrow streams running through fields were now wide ribbons of water winding through the countryside. In many places, these wetlands formed within just a few years. But the real surprise was what happened next. The wetlands became magnets for wildlife. Amphibians like frogs, toads, and newts returned in large numbers. Birds that depend on wetlands, kingfishers, herons, and snipe, started nesting and feeding in areas where they hadn't been seen in decades. Insects like dragonflies and damselflies flourished in the new ponds. Fish populations, including brown trout and even salmon in some locations, found refuge in the calmer waters behind the dams. All of this activity attracted larger predators as well. Otters became more common, bats fed on the growing insect populations, and rare plants that thrive in wet ground started to spread. In areas where beavers had been active for just 5 or 6 years, scientists documented significant increases in biodiversity compared to nearby rivers without beavers. What surprised many flood control experts was how beaver dams managed water. During heavy rains, the dams acted like natural flood barriers, holding back water and releasing it slowly. In dry periods, the ponds kept local water tables higher, helping to maintain water supplies for both wildlife and nearby farmland. Water flowing out of beaver wetlands was often cleaner, as sediments and pollutants settled out behind the dams. In fact, some scientists argued that beavers were performing natural flood prevention and water purification at a fraction of the cost of man-made systems. But it wasn't all positive. The same dams that slowed floods downstream could raise water levels upstream, sometimes flooding fields, roads, or drainage systems. Some farmers lost portions of their land to expanding wetlands. Trees felled by beavers sometimes blocked smaller watercourses or damaged private property. Landowners complained that they had little legal ability to remove beaver dams on their own. In Scotland's Knapdale trial, these issues were closely monitored and mostly controlled due to the remote location, but in England's river otter population, where beavers spread freely along more developed farmland, conflicts were harder to predict. The surprising success of beavers at reshaping the environment reignited an old debate. How do you balance nature's benefits with human land use? Supporters pointed to the ecological gains, flood prevention, and tourism opportunities. Critics warned that without strict controls, beavers could create costly problems for farmers and landowners. One thing was clear, this experiment had moved far beyond a simple trial. Beavers were now wild again in Britain, and people had to decide what to do next. By the mid-2010, it was no longer just a local story. Beavers were back, not just in carefully controlled reserves, but in wild rivers, private estates, and agricultural landscapes. What began as small experiments had grown into a national discussion about wildlife, land management, and the future of British conservation. At first, there were no clear rules. Were these animals legally allowed to stay? Who was responsible if they flooded land? Could landowners remove dams on their own? The answers varied between England, Scotland, and Wales. In some cases, it came down to temporary licenses or exemptions. In Scotland, where the original Knapdale trial was closely monitored, the government took the first major step. In 2019, beavers were officially recognized as a protected native species under Scottish law. This meant killing or trapping beavers became illegal without a license. Their habitats received legal protection. Landowners could apply for permits to manage conflicts, but removal required government approval. Scotland became the first part of the UK to fully recognize wild beavers as a part of the natural landscape again. In England, the river otter population continued to grow. After years of study, Natural England, the government's conservation body, released a key report in 2020. The findings were clear. Beavers improved water quality. They reduced flood risks downstream. Biodiversity in beaver-modified areas increased significantly. Public support for the animals was strong. In 2022, the English government announced that beavers would receive legal protection across England, similar to the protections in Scotland. At the same time, they introduced management plans to handle conflicts. Landowners could apply for assistance and licenses if beaver activity threatened crops, infrastructure, or private property. With legal protection in place, official reintroduction projects expanded. New beaver families were released in Kent, Yorkshire, Devon, and Cornwall. Several private estates began carefully managed releases. Wales launched pilot programs to assess future reintroductions. In some cases, reintroductions were paired with public education campaigns to build local support. By 2024, the UK had multiple growing beaver populations, both officially sanctioned and wild-born, spreading through river systems that hadn't seen a beaver in centuries. But even with protections in place, the national debate hasn't disappeared. Some farmers still worry about land loss. Insurance issues around flood damages remain unresolved. calls for government compensation programs continue. Wildlife managers are still studying how to balance beaver expansion with agricultural needs. Beavers are now fully part of Britain's conservation story, but their return raises difficult questions about how humans share land with wild animals. The work wasn't finished, it was just entering a new phase. The return of the beavers has not just reshaped rivers, it's reshaped how many people think about conservation itself. Because beavers are not like most animals, they don't simply live in a habitat, they create it, and that's what makes them so important. Beavers are what scientists call ecosystem engineers. Their dams slow water, their ponds create wetlands, and their constant activity transforms entire landscapes. These changes affect dozens, sometimes hundreds of other species. In many cases, simply having beavers present allows other species to survive or return, where they otherwise wouldn't. In this way, beavers act as a natural shortcut for ecosystem restoration. Instead of expensive human-built wetlands or artificial flood controls, beavers do the work for free and often more effectively. For years, much of British conservation focused on protecting isolated species or small nature reserves. The beaver reintroduction showed something different. Entire systems can be repaired by bringing back species that drive natural processes. Wetlands hold more carbon, helping fight climate change. Slower rivers reduce flood damage downstream. Cleaner water benefits communities and wildlife alike. And all of this happens simply because one species is allowed to return to its natural role. But while the benefits are clear, the beaver story also exposes a harder reality. Nature recovery is not always neat or convenient for humans. Beaver dams don't follow property lines or respect farmland boundaries. Wetlands expand, trees fall, some areas flood that weren't supposed to flood. The same behaviors that create thriving ecosystems can also create serious conflicts with farming, land ownership, and infrastructure. That's why many experts say successful rewilding is not just about bringing animals back, it's about managing how people adapt to sharing space with them. Compensation programs may be needed for farmers. Buffer zones could be planned along vulnerable rivers. Local management teams are necessary to handle conflicts as they arise. Without clear policies and funding, even the most successful reintroductions can turn into political battles. What's happening with beavers in Britain is not unique. Similar projects are underway across Europe. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany have expanding beaver populations. Many countries now see beavers as part of natural climate adaptation strategies. Even in urban areas, some cities are learning how to design around beaver activity instead of fighting it. In a world facing rising floods, droughts, and collapsing ecosystems, beavers are offering a simple but powerful lesson. Sometimes letting nature repair itself works better than trying to control every part of it. For centuries, people removed beavers from Britain, but nature lost one of its most skilled engineers. Now, as they return, we're watching entire landscapes heal in ways we couldn't fully predict. But as always, nature's comeback is not simple. It forces us to ask hard questions about how we share land, water, and resources. So what do you think? Should we let nature take its course? Or try to control it? Can we learn to coexist with animals that reshape the world around them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.